So my news is that I am going to get to go to Infocom, and that's because we're having our baby tomorrow.
What?
Yay! Oh,
Tomorrow!
Yeah. On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about AV programmers and their career paths. How have we gotten to where we are, and what are the different options for moving forward? All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 105. Always be learning. Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control programming and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. On today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about career paths and what's available for AV programmers, and also how an AV programmer should think about what's their next step, or perhaps doing what they're doing is their chosen path. So we'll get into all of that, and with us to talk about that are two returning guests, and we'll talk with them in a bit. And before we do, get to say hi to my partner here at A State of Control, Rich Fregosa. How are you, Rich?
It's going good, brother. All right. We're on our pushing towards Infocom very quickly, a couple of weeks away. So it'll be good to be in the same physical space with you.
I'm looking forward to that. That'd be great.
And we're not underwater anymore. So like for the first, I think 3 days in a row, I got sunlight. So I'm pretty happy.
Welcome to the rest of the world. Well, in addition to Rich, we have two returning guests, as I mentioned, and they're actually both on the same show on episode 80, which is really cool. But the last time we spoke to our first guest was episode 101, and he is Brian Magrogan from Verrex. Welcome back, Brian.
Thank you very much for having me, Steve. It's great to be back. It's great to talk to all of you. I can't wait to have a good conversation and some good laughs.
Absolutely. And last but not least, you may also know him from a podcast that we co-host together, which is certainly one that this audience should tune into, called Ask the Programmer. He is James King, and he is from the School of Medicine at UNLV. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here with Brian, Rich, and yourself.
As I mentioned at the top, AV programmers kind of get to doing programming from a lot of different paths. Some have programming background and are intentional about it. Others look at it as maybe a stepping stone, moving from a technician role to a programmer role, or from maybe a project manager role to a programmer role. And then there are some that just end up being the one that has to get a job done, and you become the programmer. So I hope everybody can kind of relate to those different scenarios. But in all the cases, you have kind of a choice as to what you want to do. But everybody's experiences can be quite different, depending on the market that you're in, depending on the type of projects you do. And we'll kind of talk about all of those. But Rich, I wanted to just kind of start by just talking about how really important is it for an AV programmer to have a path, or is it okay to just really be comfortable doing what you're doing, get really good at it, and kind of be that guy or gal?
Well, I think it's really for any industry, right? I mean, if you're going to be a stockbroker, if you're going to be a mechanical engineer, if you're going to be an electrical engineer, there's a certain point where you have to decide, not only the nuts and bolts of what you do, and your craft, but also, honestly, the things that are going to make you happy and the things that are going to continue to make you money. And it does depend on where you're living and your age and your goal set. I mean, I know that, at 21, my plan and kind of what I decided my trajectory was going to be is completely different as a middle-aged guy with, 2 kids and a house and everything else. I think that one sets you up for the other, where you then have the decision to say, hey, I want to keep what I'm doing and expand on that, or, switch, or, that's the beauty of youth, right? In that part. And I think that's where we're talking necessarily, where you've got kind of the groups, right? You've got somebody who's breaking into the industry, somebody who's maybe at that midpoint in the industry where they're kind of deciding, do they take that next step? Are they happy where they're at? And then the other side of the industry, which is, okay, I've kind of accomplished the things that where I'm at now. Are there new challenges available, or is it time for that reach one, teach one? And so there's these different stages in kind of your employment path. And I think everybody goes through that during their career. But for programmers, that really is the interesting part, because you have to kind of look at yourself and decide, if I got into programming, did I get into programming because I like working by myself? I like, me against the machine and being the problem solver, and that, kind of that focus, the guy behind the keyboard in all the movies, right? Does that fulfill me? And are my management and social skills and all of those other skills, are those skills that I want to build? Are those skills that I have? Are those skills that I honestly decide that, that's not me? I'm not necessarily the people person. I'm the machine person. So those really do lay out those foundations, which you can be a fantastic programmer, but software changes quickly. And so it's not like being a coworker. It's not like being a locomotive engineer. Those were, those trajectories were long, and there wasn't a whole lot of change in the industry. I kind of look at it as like when we started out as a factory worker, like in a car factory, right? I had family who in the 70s worked at the big Ford plants, and they were really specialized and really good at what they did. That was less than 50 years ago. Those are not done by humans anymore, like much less, other people to pass it on, but, sentient beings aren't even doing it. So, and but there was that period of time in between, from, World War II to, to the mid 70s, 80s, right before that changed over. That was a good chunk of time. We don't have those timelines anymore in the software world. And so in the software world, the flexibility for this generation, one of the things you used to laugh, right, is like when you were our age, if there was a gap or if you job skipped, that was frowned upon, right? That was seen as a mark against you, right? You couldn't stay somewhere long enough. You didn't have the longevity. If you look at the resumes of, the millennial and the Gen Z, that's kind of the point of pride, right? Because they are leveraging themselves. And I'm really glad about that, because I think this generation of programmers doesn't necessarily have the guilt that we had. We always had that inferiority complex at times of like, who is that? Oh, that's just the XYZ guy. That's the programmer, right? Always used to be the guy who came in with the laptop and sat on the paint bucket, right? I mean, all 4 of us at one point in our career were the people that the salespeople and the engineering team and everybody pointed to. And who's that? Oh, don't worry about that. That's just the programmer, right? Sitting there typing away on the paint bucket, while they're, finishing floors around us and stuff. This generation of programmers doesn't necessarily have to deal with that. And I'm glad for that. I'm glad that they can come in and decide that their worth is, I provide a separate skill set of services. I deal with solutions. And so they can leverage themselves instead of being locked in and paying your dues, which we all did. That's what we all felt we had to do. This generation coming up, no, it's not that you don't have to pay your dues. It's just that they understand that as they build their skill set, they are valuable, and they should be marketing that value to a place that's going to appreciate them, where they can gain the income and everything else. So kind of bringing this all back in the long story, I think that this generation of software programmers has the ability to give themselves lots of options and not feel stuck or trapped in a position. They can very quickly change their stars if they want to. And that's kind of exciting, I'm glad to see after all these years that this next group has the opportunity.
James, I'll shift over to you because you are somebody who recently kind of changed your career trajectory, starting out really from IT, getting into AV, getting into programming, now getting into management. So talk a little bit about that, maybe what was the thought process behind it and how much programming now plays in your roles or what you think your future is headed toward.
Yeah, I did do a lot of changes over the year in my career. But I want to tacked onto that where my end goal, like where I envisioned myself going to, was management. So that was always something I saw myself going to. I actually never saw myself in AV or being an AV programmer. Kind of like everyone else, I've got thrown into it, and then my boss is like, "Here, figure this out, make it work," and that's what I was doing. So I do enjoy the programming part, and I have to say, Rich, you got a paint bucket. I never was that lucky. um, I sat many times on the floor, but yes. So that was always my goal, was to get into management some way, somehow, and that's one thing I like about higher education. It allowed me to span. I wasn't just a programmer. I also was an installer. I was also a designer. In fact, where I was very fortunate that I worked in an environment that we did 99% of the stuff in-house. The only time that we went outsourced outside of our son was when we didn't have the bandwidth or the resources to do the job. And normally those were the jobs we were fixing later. So I was fortunate enough there. But I also want to hit on something that Rich has mentioned is, yeah, a lot of times the programmer was, oh, don't worry about the man behind the curtain or the person behind the curtain. Don't worry about them. They're going to do their magic and that's it. But the thing is now is programmers are becoming headhunted. Companies are seeing like, well, Rich is doing this for company Z. Hey, Rich, we'll pay you 5% more. Come work for us. And then Rich does that, and he does something great for company Y. And then company A hears about it and be like, hey, Rich, we'll pay you 5% more. Come work for us. And so, yeah, that changing jobs quickly is happening because they're being headhunted. We talked about that in higher ed is if you're in a area where there's a lot of colleges are seeing that. They're seeing techs, not just programming, but just your techs and be like, well, James is doing this for the School of Medicine at UNLV. We can reuse him at this school. So we're going to try to pull him over. So you definitely seeing a lot of that headhunting now, I feel.
Brian, I do want to follow up on what James said, but also you have a nice progression story too that you could talk to, and I could say that I was personally part of it at one point when you and I met quite a number of years ago now. You were, I believe, a field engineer, and I was doing programming, and now you're leading programmers. So I guess talk a little bit to that, and also what is I think one of the driving factors toward your desire to pursue that.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of like you said, I started as an on-site technician, bottom of the ladder, let's run around and service these rooms. And very quickly I saw, this magic behind the scenes of this touch panel that talks to all these different pieces. And I kind of saw in my career path that I had to go through being an install tech, being a field engineer before I could get there, and I feel like all of that has helped build my skill set so that I can understand a lot of what's happening behind the scenes and a lot of the way that hardware works in not just in a lab environment, right, but in a real world scenario, how it actually works, which allows me to think a little bit different about it, and that kind of set me on my trajectory. And then getting to the programming side of things, right? Like starting with these small jobs and then all of a sudden getting thrown at a massive project with 4-way divisible space, having never done a divisible space and being scared sitting there of, okay, all right, I'm going to make this work, and we're going to get through it. So, but yeah, I mean, you and I worked early on when you were actually programming, and it was awesome. I have a lot of mentors along the way, which have been very helpful, seeing the way that other programmers work, seeing the way that other things are done, and that's been extremely helpful. But I think the driving factor behind all of that is this is what I enjoy doing, right? This is what gets me up in the morning, what gets me to my desk, and I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy the creativity that we get in a lot of cases where I feel like a lot of programmers in other industries don't have that necessarily creativity side of it. I love the touch panel design side so that I can be creative there. And making oddball pieces of equipment talk together that were never meant to talk together. So it just keeps my interest and keeps me engaged. And, not to say there aren't days where I'm like, okay, we got to make it through this day. We're going to get this project done and, we're going to move on to the next one. But there are also days where it's like, wow, that was a win. That is awesome. I'm so happy I worked on that. And that was just a great project.
I think that's really what draws me to programming as well, is seeing the fruit of the labor. To go on what Brian was saying was, I remember one of the big one of my first big project where I almost did the whole thing, like from ground up. It was a redesign, so I actually did the design, I did the ordering of the equipment, I did the configuring the equipment, I did the programming, I did the commissioning, in the stall, like my team and I. But we worked on that, and I remember it was a big space, like Brian was mentioning. It was my first divisible space. It was my first space working with a DSP, my first space working with like true amplifiers, not those built-in all-in-one boxes. And I remember our first big event there, and the CIO was there, and one of the administration people were on the microphone, and he started yelling to the microphone, and it crackled. And I was like, oh no, I got to fix this. So after the event, I went to the CIO, and I'm like, how do you think the room worked? And he response was, it worked beautiful. He's like, it's great. I'm like, all right. I was like, I'm a little concerned. The audio got crackle when blah, blah, blah got loud on the microphone. And my CIO looked me in the face and goes, in the past, when he got loud on the microphone, you couldn't hear a word he said. He's like, at least we heard him. It crackled, but at least we understood what he said. So I was like, wow, that's a win. Like, we went from not hearing to at least crackling, and we fixed the crackling.
You touched on another point there, James, right? I feel like AV programmers specifically, we are a bit of a different animal because, like you said, we get to follow the entire process, right? In the perfect world, we're involved right at the very beginning, and we're involved through the end and then into the service cycle of something. And I feel like that's a lot different than a lot of programmers and even a lot of people in the industries where, they have their chunk that they do, but we kind of overarch over the entire project, which I like. I like following through all of that and seeing the end.
Rich, I'll bring it back around to you, and I'm sure that there's a lot of different ways that we can talk about this. One of the things that I'm curious about is we said about being able to take different jobs and move into different places. How important is it to have a diverse background versus having really just getting really good at one particular thing and being focused there? Is that is there pros and there are pros and cons, of course, but is there something that we could advise to those that are listening as to how to navigate their way through a situation like that? Because you obviously, unless you are independent, you're going to, and even those people, you're going to be doing the work that the clients ask of you or that your company specializes in.
Well, and that's exactly it, right? Is that you've got, your first two immediate choices are, do you sign on with a big powerhouse, big powerhouse integrator and become part of a large team? And there's some benefit to that in terms of learning to work within an organization. They may be the depth and breadth of their projects. You may find yourself in a NOC one day and, a corporate campus or something the other day, or you go the small route, the boutique route, right? And there you've got the ability, because you have less people, maybe not the ability, I guess the opportunity, that you got to wear a lot of hats. And some people thrive on that, right? Some people thrive on being the problem solver. Some people thrive on that multitasking element, like James and Brian, and even you were talking about, like we all came in. For me, I think that if you're starting in your career, unless, it's really rare, unless you kind of get in there out of school and you go, wow, I found my home, I found my people, I found everything I want to do. It can happen, but it's rare. At that point, though, it becomes a matter of, hey, look, if you really want to get good at what you do, getting good at what you do means being able to do it across a variety of environments. So start out, corporate. But if all you're doing is, say, setting up a single huddle space with a Nook or something, that's not necessarily flexing your wings. Now, you could sit there day in and day out, and maybe you like it because you go in, you do the same thing, you're in, you're out, you grab a coffee and away you go. But if you're looking for a new challenge, well, find another company. And maybe they specialize in education. So maybe now you're dealing with a campus, or you're working at a university, or, now you're still taking that same skill set, but in a completely different environment, because you're dealing with, maybe a campus IT, which is completely different than corporate IT. Maybe there's an opportunity for resi or retail, or hospitality. It's at that same point, your approach should be the same. It's the stuff that you touch that will be different. But, I know that, like, when I advise people, I'm one of the few that, I jump in and out from resi to commercial and education. But that's over, 30 something years of doing it, and blocks of time focused on one, and then blocks of time focused on the other. And, it becomes kind of that riding the bike. I'm grateful for that opportunity, because I think they help each other out. When you're too far in commercial and you're dealing with a space, you can forget about the people. And when you are in resi, you're so focused on the people, because the personalities, and it's their space, that you can forget about your process. So, and that is probably if there's going to be a difference between the two, that is where you can find your balance. And even education, right? Again, you're dealing with a different subset of personalities and rules and processes. And so the more processes that you can get yourself experience in, the more valuable it makes you, because you can come in and somebody says, oh yeah, we're doing this. Yeah. We've done classrooms before. Not a problem. Here are the pain points that we ran into. And that becomes something that you bring to the party. And that's what you always got to look at, right? Is what do you bring to the party, where it becomes a matter of, okay, these are the things that I've done. Is this something teachable? Do I want to teach, or do I just kind of want to focus? Well, if you have that experience, a breadth of experience, and you come into, say, a small shop, you can kind of call your own shots at that point. If you come into a large organization, well, then your track, your education track, or your maybe you don't necessarily want to be the head of the division, but you like the idea of being a project leader, right? A software project leader, where you aren't necessarily doing the DSP programming and the coding and the touch panel design and everything else, but you like being kind of that overlay that helps bring that together. That's a skill set that a sales engineer can't do, right? Because they don't have the technical chops. But you can work with the sales engineer so that the guys in the field, maybe you're the one who wants to save the guys in the field for having to constantly complain about, oh, they just sold this thing again, and away you go. And so there's a lot, and I think it is the sweet spot for the programmer, because honestly, you could, pick up the engineering side of it if you wanted to, because you have to deal with those boxes anyway. And you can also deal with the design and the sales side of it, because you have to deal with those boxes anyway. And so that really does become this. And again, I've seen lots of programmers do great at sales because they know what that end result is. And they're able to go ahead and relay that information. I've also seen them be great PMs, because they've gotten so frustrated with what was put upon them that they've been able to implement a process to help, that last mile. Because that's really is for the programming side, the control system programmers, right? You're always that last mile person, right? You may not get to actually talk to the end user. They may try to push you off to the side, and then everybody comes in to save the day. But you're still there. You're still the one answering the questions, right? And so, I think I do like that, because I think you can do both. I think you can be good at what you do by expanding the width and the breadth of your experiences.
Brian, I'll take this from another angle too, because I think what Rich said is really important, and I think that there's something to be said for being able to be put in different positions and different roles, but also dealing with different types of systems, even though it's all programming. How important is it to have different exposure and experience with languages or different products that you normally wouldn't work with?
I think obviously the more diverse your portfolio is, or the more diverse your knowledge is across product lines, across programming languages, makes you more valuable, right? And makes you kind of better at what you do, for lack of a better term there. But especially in today's world where we have to pivot all the time, right? A sales engineer might have sold your control system X, and by the time we get to installation, control system X is 12 months out. We have to go with control system Y. And so how do I get myself there? And the answer to that, honestly, is always be learning, right? You always have to keep on top of everything. And so having the knowledge across the different levels of platforms, and not only, your control system platform, but the DSP platforms, the different aspects that have to be done. I feel like a lot of my time, I don't want to quite say 50% of my time, but a good chunk of it, 35, 40% of my time, is working with technicians, working with end users about different pieces of the system that aren't necessarily mine, but I have to understand them, and I have to know how to go in and change them to show the problem's not here, or, to rectify the problem, we're going to do it here. And it's kind of put back on me to prove that it's not me. So without having the knowledge of all the different product lines, I don't want to say that I would fail, but I certainly, wouldn't be able to get those jobs across the finish line as easily. So I think it's extremely important to have a diverse skill set and have a understanding of a diverse set of systems. Rich said something really good in terms of the difference between commercial and resi, right? And commercial, it's really easy to forget about the people. And in resi, it's really easy to forget about the process. And I've done a couple, resi favors for people recently, and remembering the person, right? Remembering the fact that, while in a commercial environment, this is not going to be 100% tailored to a specific person, but remembering that there is a person coming in to use this, and not me who knows to press buttons 2, 6, and 7 in order to do something, and that everybody's going to bring something different to the table is huge. So I thank you for bringing that up, Rich. That's really a good point.
James, one of the things that I'm a big believer in is that, as Brian said, always be learning. And I know that you and I have talked about this before. How do you go about that? And is that something that you would expect an employer to be endorsing and providing that opportunity, or do you recommend somebody doing that and taking the responsibility upon themselves to do the work on their time, or put in at least their share of time to be able to advance their career and potentially be doing training, attaining different levels of qualifications, let's say, to allow them to advance?
Great question. And my answer is yes and yes. I know we've talked about this and we have hinted on it with as a programmer as well, but always be learning. That's a hashtag I use all the time on Twitter. I'm always learning whatever I can. The thing is, let's just even look in the true IT world and programming world. COBOL. COBOL was a dead language. All COBOL programmers got fired, got laid off. If they didn't have a skill set to go to something else, they were out of a job. We see that all the time in IT, where things quickly change. You either got C++, C#, Java, JavaScript, like everything is changing. And AV is starting to get there now, especially AV programming with going into the Python and the C Sharp and all those common languages. So if you don't learn and you don't apply new skills, you're going to end up like the COBOL programmers without a job. So it's definitely important to always be learning, always advancing your career. And when I interviewed for my current position, one of the things I talked about was I wanted professional development for myself and my team. And the company backed that. So I'm like pushing my team right now. I have 2 outstanding techs on my team full time. I have student workers on my team, and I'm sharing all resources I can with them. In fact, I just learned the other day one of my student workers went and got BIAMP training on the 101 and the Tessera. So he's actually certified in BIAMP. I never asked them to do it. I just provided the links to them. Appreciate it, and this is a good skill set for him. And then I have other techs who are going to other like the Net Plus and Security Plus because that's stuff they're interested in. So I'm fostering that with them. I'm like, this is great, do it. But if you're in a job that will not pay or will not foster it, it is on you because you should always be learning and you're gonna set yourself up to a position that is gonna get you there. Like I've told people, it's don't I know the saying is if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I kind of disagree with that to a point. It depends on the room. Because if we're sitting in a room right now, all 4 of us in a room, I agree. We're all programmers. If you're the smartest programmer in the room, you're probably in the wrong room because you're not learning. But if I'm sitting there in a education conference room and I have the network administrator, I have the programmer myself, I have the help desk manager, and all that stuff. Well, the network administrator is going to be the smartest person on the networking side. I'm going to be the smartest person on the AV programming side, but I don't know networking. I'm going to learn. So that's why I'm like, all right, it all depends on what the room is. So definitely always be learning and pick up tabs. I know networking. I know DBAs. I know security. Am I an expert in them? No, but I can talk the language, and that's why I think as programmers we really need to be able to do, not just in AV but in general, is be able to talk the same language as our network administrators, as our DBAs, as the security administrators. However we're communicating, because we are all a team and same goal. And I kind of laugh at Brian and Rich talking about the resi and the corporate, and how resi you focus on people, corporate you focus on the process. Higher ed, we're stuck in the middle. We deal with the people and we got to deal with the process. And each higher ed is different in its general. Like where I was on the East Coast, we were a liberal arts school. We had faculty members, we had tenured faculty. I could sit there and design a room. You're going to have hundreds of different faculty using that room, but they're going to be using it all semester. They get familiar with it. I'm now in the medical school. I might have a doctor who's a world heart surgeon who comes in once a year to give a lecture. They don't care how the room works. They want to come in, give their lecture, and they're leaving and going back to the hospital. So that whole getting comfy with the system is not something that I'm fortunate enough with all of my faculty members here at the new job. So our systems have to be easy enough that someone walking off the street can just use the room with little and no help. And then we also do provide that help. And like I said, we do also have those recurring faculty members who teach and all that stuff. So everyone's different. And like I said, we fall in the middle in higher ed where I have users. I got to deal with my end users, but also I got to process because there are so many wide users. Like at a resi, each resi is different, but I could teach Rich, okay, here's the buttons you're using to turn on your system, and that person's great. They know it. that doesn't change. Corporate, you might have to, teach a secretary or a business administrator of how to turn on the boardroom for the president, but then they get to use it's the same person, they understand it. For higher ed, like I said, I got a rotational of people coming in. I have people coming from the community, I have faculty, I have deans, I have president of the university, and sometimes, knock on wood, we have presidents of the United States coming and giving speeches. So we have a wide range of people.
Very well said, and that's probably a good place for us to stop. But this is just a wonderful conversation that I think we all were able to really feel a part of, and also relate to in many different ways. And I hope our audience also feels that same way. But please reach out to any of us here if you'd like to talk a little bit about your situation or anything that any more insight we could provide. With that said, Brian, how can people get in touch with you, learn more about Verrex and anything else that you're up to?
I mean, as Uncle Richie always says, you can find me on the interwebs at B Magrogan on all the socials. You can find Verrex at verrex.com and learn all about the services that we provide all the way through. And you can reach me, B Magrogan at verrex.com.
Excellent. And James, how can people get in touch with you, learn what you're up to, perhaps listen to our our Ask the Programmer podcast, and also learn more about the School of Medicine at UNLV?
So yeah, if you Google me, you'll find me. Twitter, AV_James King. Anything with HEPMA. I am very involved with HEPMA. I do write for the Higher Ed Digital Magazine, the IT and AV column. I see mentioned co-host of Ask the Programmer that comes out weekly. Again, I'm out there. You can find me. I love to connect with people all the time.
Take him up on that. And Rich, how can people get in touch with you? And if you have any more closing words that you wanted to share, please do.
Well, yeah, I really do want to reiterate that, reach out. There are lots of Twitter groups. There's Facebook groups, obviously. Any individual here. But these are the ones that sometimes you don't know the question asked. Sometimes the just thing to do is introduce yourself and say, "Hey, I've been doing this for a while, and what do you think?" And tap into those resources. Infocom's coming up. If you haven't asked, if you're working for a company, if you haven't asked to go, campaign to go. Expand what you're doing. HETMA has things going on. There's regional shows that are opening up again. We're seeing the opportunity for you to be out there, and it is important not only to be working on the nuts and bolts of what you do, but the social side of what you do and getting out and meeting other programmers. Because again, once you can kind of get away from being isolated and on your island, you remember that there's other people in the industry, you build your friendships. And Steve and I, decades, at this point, it's come from that, seeing each other and having that opportunity to just be able to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I got something going on." And, business, personal, any of those things, but it's important to have those friendships as well. Your working environment, spend a great deal of your life working. Try to make it as fun as possible, as I do with Beagle sitting back here. So you can go ahead and find me on the interwebs. While you can also see the dogs on the interwebs as well. FregosaDesign.com, on Twitter at @rfregosa. But first and foremost, as I always say, I hope you find me here on AVNation.tv with our suite of shows that hit all of our verticals. And please support our sponsors.
Well said, and it is true, and I think that these friendships go a long way, and we all feel very comfortable talking to each other and sharing stories, and I rarely find people that are closed. It's really what makes our industry so cool and so welcoming, and I think keeps people in it. For me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media, my company Control Concepts at controlconcepts.net. Please, if you do like this show and you want to hear another podcast that's similar, check out Ask the Programmer. Rich was on and did a fireside chat with us for an episode, and also shared a little bit about some of his experiences. So check that out. It's a really great episode and one of our probably more downloaded ones. But for this podcast and AVNation, please go to avnation.tv, just like Rich said. Leave a rating, review. Let us know what you think. We're always open to new guests, new show ideas. Please reach out to us about that. We want to expand our horizons, and we want to keep on serving this audience. And with that, this has been A State of Control.